Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in our new webinar series for user training for Aero users. Today's webinar, we're going to go over the very beginning of setting up your Aero account. We're going to walk through the setup menu, and then we're going to review a little bit of the admin menu. The first thing that I want to review right now, actually, is this screen, this login screen. When you first log into Aero, or before you even log into Aero, you'll see this landings page. Here's where we put some news. We will post if there's been features, new features added, updates, bug fixes, any information that we might want to get across to all of our users will be here, and this screen changes every couple of weeks. So if you bookmark this page, then when you log into Aero in the morning, then you can see a little bit of Aero news. All right, so the setup menu, the first thing that you want to do when you have opened your brand new Aero account is you want to come and go to the setup menu and choose My Company. These are some very basic settings for your Aero firm and how you want to handle a couple of things. The first thing is this auto sync time box. If you check that auto sync time, that means that every single time entry, every time you or any of your team members save and complete a task or save and defer a task, that creates a time entry, and every single one of those time entries will automatically be sent to QuickBooks if your Aero account is connected, of course, to a QuickBooks Online account. If that time entry is marked as billable, it will show up in the client file and be available to be added to an invoice. If you leave this AutoSync time box unchecked, you can use the bulk update time entries feature to approve certain times to be sent to QuickBooks. So you can send some times to QuickBooks and have most of your time stay in your Aero account. So for this company, I'm going to leave the AutoSync time unchecked. I'm going to talk about the hourly rate in just a minute, but this billing rate option is something that is important, especially, again, if your Aero account is connected to a QBO account. The first list, the billing rate option is where Aero looks to find the hourly billing rate for the time entries. So if you choose item, Aero is going to pull the billing rates from your QuickBooks service items. Again, this is only available if your Aero account is connected to a QuickBooks Online account. If you choose customer, Aero will look in the client and your customer record in Aero to find the billing rate that is specific to that customer. So you can set a different billing rate by customer. If you choose team member, there's a place in the team member record that you can put an hourly billing rate for each team member. So if you choose to bill differently depending upon which team member is doing the client work, you can choose that billing rate option. And finally, if you choose company, then Aero will apply the same billing rate to everything in your account. And if you choose company, that's where you want to fill in this default hourly rate. I'm going to leave it at item, but whatever changes you make, you want to save those changes, and Aero is going to give you a positive confirmation that the settings were saved. So moving on, we'll add a team member. When you open your Aero account, you, as the admin, are already added as a team member, but not all of these settings have been made because it's created you as a team member, assigned you the highest security level so you can access all parts of Aero, but there are a few more fields that you might want to come and fill out. The first one is if you are connected to a QBO account. In order to sync your time to QBO, you are going to need to come here and select which employee or vendor time entity in QBO you want your Aero person to be connected to. The time zone defaults to the time zone you chose when you opened your Aero account. You can change that here. And you can also connect your Aero account to your Google Apps for Work or Gmail account. And here's where you would enter your Gmail, email, and Gmail password, and then check whether or not you do want to enable the email feature in Gmail. We have a webinar scheduled coming up later in this series that's going to talk about the entire Gmail integration. So I'm not going to talk about that today, but this is where you would fill out the Gmail email and Gmail password in order to check to send and receive emails from Aero. I should mention, just to make it clear, that this integration, you do not have to enable this integration to use Aero. Aero doesn't use email notifications of tasks or daily digests of tasks. We are trying to help you actually winnow down your email rather than add to it. So the Gmail integration is simply something that is an additional feature to Aero, but it is not necessary in order to use Aero. And then down at the bottom here is where you can fill in an hourly billing rate for your team members. So if you have chosen that billing rate option to bill a different hourly rate by team member, you can fill that here. And then there's a field to put in an hourly cost rate. So you can fill in an average hourly weighted cost for your team members. That is information that is used for reporting purposes only in Aero. It doesn't sync to QBO. It's not going to show up anywhere in your general ledger, but that is a cost rate you determine and you fill out, and then that cost rate will be used in some reporting in Aero. Okay, so this team member is all set up, and I'd like to go ahead and actually add one more team member just so you can see the process from start to finish. So we're going to add a new team member. We'll add Jane. And you'll see here that the email address is required. You'll notice if I try to type in an email address that doesn't exist, it's going to tell me, wait, that doesn't exist. I need to add a new. So you need to actually create the team member as a contact before you can add them as a team member or a user in Aero. So let me just add Jane as a contact. And so now when I start to try to type Jane's email, it's going to give me the option to select it. So you cannot enter a new email here. You need to create your team member as a contact and then select their email from the drop-down list. Security level is important. If I'm going to give Jane a higher security level, but maybe not access to all the admin menus, in order to determine which security level you want to give your team members, that's available on the help site, like a lot of other information. And there's this grid here that will show you what security levels can access what parts of Aero. And in addition, the security level will determine what they can access in the client vault, which we will go over in a future webinar. So I've added Jane. I can say that, give her a manager if I want. That's optional. And then I would need to choose Jane's QuickBooks entity. If Jane isn't in my QuickBooks file as a QuickBooks entity, I would need to add her as an employee or a vendor and then select her. It's not going to give me an error if I don't do that, but none of Jane's time will be able to be synced to QuickBooks until I create that entity and link them. So let me go ahead and save and close, and we'll move along to the next thing in the setup menu, which is accounting software types. This list is a list that you are creating for your firm of the different kinds of accounting software that your clients use. And we're talking about the general ledger software here. We're not talking about, of course, your clients probably use a lot of different kinds of accounting software in addition to QuickBooks or QuickBooks Online or Xero or something. Your clients probably use maybe Bill.com or Expensify or Tally or who knows what else. But what we're talking about is their general ledger software. And you just make a list of the kinds of different software that your firm supports. So for this firm, we're going to have some QBO clients, and then I'm going to say that we have some desktop clients and a couple of different versions. So you get the idea. There we go. So I have this little list now of the different kinds of accounting software that my firm supports, and I will be able to select an accounting software in the client record from this drop-down list that I have just created. So that's what accounting software types are for. The next one is Aero types. Now this is kind of a big one here. So you'll notice your account was opened with one, just a general other, but you probably want to add some yourself. Now an Aero type is the type of work that your firm does, the kinds of services your firm provides. So in an outsourced accounting firm, a bookkeeping firm, your Aero types might be something like payroll. Maybe you provide payroll services to your clients. You can say that you provide payroll, and maybe you want to break your types down even further. Maybe you want to do payroll processing as a type, and you want to do payroll taxes as a type. Or maybe you just want to lump everything under the payroll item, or type. So then the next step would be, if you are linked to a QBO account, to link that type to its corresponding service item. You can link as many types as you want to one service item. So for example, again, if you chose to say payroll processing as a type, you might link it to the payroll service item. And if you had another type called payroll taxes, you could link that to the payroll service item as well. If you are using classes in your QuickBooks account, you can link this type to a class as well. And then I'm going to add another one. So let's see, maybe I pay bills for clients, and I'm going to call this type AP. And then I'm going to link it to its service item doesn't exist. So I would link it to its corresponding service item. So let's say my next type is going to do, I do some consulting for this firm. So let me link it to its corresponding service item, and then save and close. But you get the idea. So your types could be payroll, AP, AR, consulting, maybe you do some training. And then you probably want to have some Aero types for the non-income generating activities that your firm engages in. So everybody has their admin time that they spend, and you want to track that. You want to set up those tasks in Aero and track that time, but you also probably have some other, maybe not directly income generating, but maybe activities that hopefully will get there, like sales or marketing, or maybe you have some professional development activities you and your team members engage in, and maybe you want to track that time. So you would create those types, those Aero types, link them to maybe an overhead service item that you have in QuickBooks, and then you can track and see how your firm spends its time, how much time you're spending on admin versus income generating. And that's what those types are going to do for you. They're going to organize the work that you have scheduled, and they're going to organize the time that you post. So those are Aero types. There's further information about Aero types available here on the help site. Again, there's also a blog article that has Aero types, explaining a little bit more about Aero types. There's a lot of information about Aero types. They are sort of a central feature in Aero, and they control a lot of the reporting. So it's worth it to take some time to think about how your services are organized, maybe define what types of services you offer, and group them into classes, into groups, pots that you want to organize your work. Of course, this can evolve as your firm evolves. Maybe you start off with 10 Aero types and you realize that you want to track your time a little bit more minutely and break it down further, so you can add Aero types. Maybe you start off with 20, 25 Aero types and you realize, I do not want that granular reporting. You can come back here and make your Aero, some of the Aero types inactive, and then going forward have fewer Aero types. So that is absolutely, it's not set in stone, but it's worth spending some time thinking about and defining what kind of work your firm does when you're setting up your Aero types. All right, moving right along. Procedure types. So in Aero, you can set up standard operating procedures for the work your firm does. And maybe these procedures are specific to your firm. So maybe they're internal procedures, how we do this here. Maybe they are procedures that are specific to a specific client. Maybe you have a client who has a very particular payroll process. Maybe they're a government contractor and there's all kinds of rules you have to follow, or a union, they're a shop or something, and you have a very specific procedure for that particular client. So the procedure types are something that are going to allow you to organize the different kinds of procedures that you have in your firm. So usually people have an internal procedure, something that's just for internal firm activities. Maybe they have a procedure type that's called client or client specific for those kinds of procedures that are specific to one client. Sometimes you might have procedures that are called software or app or tools or something, so that your procedures that are specific to a certain app that your firm uses, software program that your firm uses, you might group the procedures for that area in one type. And this allows you, when you come to your manage procedures, which in this brand new account is empty, when you start creating your procedures, you're going to be able to sort and organize your actual procedures based on those types that you created. Again, like the Aero types, this isn't set in stone. If you create a couple of procedure types and then as you're creating your new procedures you realize you need another type, you can absolutely come over here and create another type, or make some of your too many procedure types inactive and just have fewer procedure types. So that is what this procedure types are for. The next one is project types. So in Aero, there's a hierarchy of work. You have an Aero. An Aero is something that could be a task or a meeting, even an email or a memo. An Aero is something that is going to show up on your to-do list, and you can accept that Aero. Within the Aero, there's going to be steps, a checklist, and you're going to track time associated with doing that. So that's an Aero. Aeros are intended to be able to be completed within a day. You don't necessarily always do it. You might work on it a little bit and then work on it a little bit the next day, but the intention is an Aero is a shorter time activity, maybe process payroll, maybe reconcile a bank account, something like that. A project is going to be an umbrella that holds several Aeros, many Aeros. Maybe a project is a one-time activity. Maybe you've engaged with a client to port them over from a QuickBooks desktop to online, or maybe you're just doing a complete business review of that client. That would be a project, and you would break that down into individual Aeros that are assigned to maybe different team members, and that would allow you to track all of that time for that one project under one umbrella. So, given that, your project types would again be the opportunity to organize your projects. And when you are on your Manage Projects screen, you could then sort and filter your projects based on your project types. Typical project types for an accounting or consulting firm might be consulting or training. QuickBooks Cleanup is actually a common project type. And then you can also organize your monthly recurring business, monthly recurring work into a project. And so maybe a project type is monthly accounting. You can also have internal projects like sales or marketing or, again, professional development. So those are the typical project types, but as you create projects in Aero, you probably will refine your list of project types as you go along creating new projects. Realize maybe you need a different type to encompass this new kind of project. So that's what project types are for. So the last thing on the setup menu is this hats. In Aero, you can assign a hat that's being worn in a task. When somebody is doing a task or having a meeting, they can be wearing a different hat. Especially in smaller firms, we wear a lot of different hats during the day. Currently, I'm wearing my training hat. Sometimes I'm wearing my sales hat or admin hat. So those are the kinds of hats that you might have. You might also have sort of maybe a payroll clerk hat. Maybe you have hats that are like a controller hat. Maybe sometimes you're a controller for a client, or maybe you have a CFO hat. You probably also have an admin hat. And then you can attach a hat to a task, and then as somebody's performing the task, you can be tracking time based on the different hats you're wearing during the day. All right, the next thing that I'd like to go over with you is the admin menu. And this is a menu that is accessible, like the setup menu, only to people who have a security level of SL8 or higher. But there are a few good things in here that you probably want to know about. So the first one is the Manage QuickBooks screen, I guess is the right word for it. If you're connected to a QBO account, your screen's going to look like this. If you are not connected to a QBO account, when you come here, it'll have a green button for you saying Connect to QBO. So that's the main difference. But for the people out there that are connected to QuickBooks, this is where you want to come for a couple of reasons. If you think that you have time that's missing, that should be in your QBO account, and it's not, the first place you come is this. This is going to be a sync log of everything that goes to QuickBooks and everything that fails to go to QuickBooks too. So if you tried to save something or send it to QuickBooks and it didn't show up in your QuickBooks file, come to this log and see if there's an error. See if there's a reason why it wasn't sent. It might tell you that the user is not connected to a QuickBooks entity, and that's why it wasn't sent. Or maybe it'll tell you that a service item was incomplete or something. But it'll give you an error message that's fairly legible. If you don't understand the error message, absolutely call support. But the other thing you can come here for that's very important is this Sync Now button. When you're working in Aero, all of your time entries are, if you set it up that way, all of your time entries are automatically sent to QuickBooks when you either save and complete or save and defer a task. Clients, if you work in a client file in Aero and change the address, maybe update the name, do something like that, and save that client in Aero, that update is automatically reflected in your QuickBooks file. But it doesn't work the other way. So if you add a bunch of clients in QuickBooks or service items or add new employees, then you are going to need to sync your QuickBooks file to your Aero file, and that's where you come here to do this. So I'm going to sync now. I added some service items to my QuickBooks file that weren't in my Aero account, so I synced it, and now I can see that the service items are synced, and I can go back and add those Aero types and connect them to the right service items. So that's how the QuickBooks sync works. And then the other item in the admin menu is just sort of the housekeeping of your Aero account. You can come here and find out maybe what the contact information is, what size subscription you have, and change any of that information. So if you need to update your contact information, maybe it's a different phone number or email. If you need to put in your credit card because your free trial is about to end, you would do it here. You can also change your subscription level here and choose a different subscription. And you can cancel your subscription. So if you want to cancel your Aero account, that's where you would come to do it. One last thing that for brand new accounts probably is a good thing to go over. When you first open your Aero account, your personal Aero list, which you can access from work, My Aeros, is going to have these 7, 8 tasks for you, all started, ready to go for you to accept, and it actually is going to walk you through setting up your Aero account. So that is available to the admin who opens the account. It's not every user, but the admin who opens the Aero account. And then the other thing that you want to take a look at is My Preferences. And here's where you can set up your Gmail information, but you can also change your password. When you open your Aero account, it gives you a default password, and you probably want to, first thing, come in here and change the password to your Aero account. This Give Feedback window in Aero is great. So if you have feedback for Aero, if there's a feature you want, you have a question, you think you see a bug, use that Give Feedback link, and everything, all of those are read by a human being, and that's actually how we decide, how our dev group decides what features have priority when they're deciding what to work on, is the things that are most often requested are most likely to get added. Okay. Do we have other questions?
Yeah. So can you just go over again what happens if you don't connect your team member or one of your team members that is your staff to your QuickBooks entity?
Sure. So I added a team member, Jane, I think. Jane, if I gave Jane a task and she did time on it, what I would get, actually, so what I'm going to do to show you is I'm going to disconnect me. So I'm logged in as test1 Aero, and if I just disconnect myself here, and if I were to do a task and just save and start, post some time on this here. Okay, so I've done 5 minutes here. My test1 Aero person is not connected to as a QuickBooks entity. If I were to tell Aero, yeah, go ahead and sync this time entry to QuickBooks, what's going to happen is it's not going to sync because it can't send it. And if I come over here to my Manage QuickBooks, it's going to say it was failed, it didn't go. The time entity is not set for this user. So that test1 Aero time entity is not set. The time was recorded in Aero. It's in the managed time. It's there. It's not a problem, but it's never going to show up in my QuickBooks file until I connect this test1 Aero person to their QuickBooks entity. And if I have a whole lot of time that I posted before I connected it to that QuickBooks entity, it doesn't go back through those historical time entries and then sync all those. You have to actually tell it using that bulk update or batch update time feature you have to connect all those time entries to the right entity and then tell it to try to sync all those time entries as well.
I'm just going to follow up on that discussion of the hats, actually, because I see that Jessica has typed, "Oh no," in there. So even though there's no place now to see that, the time is actually being tracked that way on the back side. So once we add that to a column, if you've been dutifully tracking time by employee, by hat all this time, you will be able to see everything historical. It's actually all that information's in the database someplace.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have a place to show it to you at the moment.
Yeah. Yes, and I know that they're planning on having a release within a couple of weeks with a bunch of just like really small, what I think of as housekeeping things, and so I'm gonna see if we can't get something in there because it's kind of funny that that it isn't available out there. So we'll push for that, Jessica.
All right. Do you have to set up procedure types?
No. There's a procedure type, a default procedure type of other, and if you want all of your procedures to have that, you have to have a procedure type for a procedure. That's a required field. But you can just use that other procedure type for all of your procedures if you want. And a procedures, not everybody uses the ability to document their procedures in Aero. That's something that's available, but not everybody uses it. So if you're not planning on using the Aero procedures, or you're not planning on using it yet, then yeah, you don't have to set up procedure types. And the difference between a procedure and an actual Aero or task is that an Aero is something that you assign to someone. It shows up on their task list, their Aero list. They track time associated with it. It has a checklist. It has that step-by-step checklist that you have. A procedure is intended to just give I don't have library access. So a procedure is intended to give more information. It's like a reference document. I always like compare it to that shelf of white binders that we all used to have at our desk with the documented procedures for the firm. So you're not going to look at them every single time you do a task, but you might need to refer to it at some point.
One thing about procedures is you can give your staff a step-by-step document, in the steps of what to do. The procedures are a great way to add pictures, and so they know exactly what they're supposed to be looking for on the screen, etc. So it's just more detail than you can give your staff in the steps of how to do what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. So if I were to...
So my procedure types in my consulting firm are internal, how to access our voicemail, etc., client-facing, and app. So sometimes app and client, I'll take an app like Expensify, and I'll have specific procedures for a specific client for Expensify. So I can take that standard Expensify one, modify it for a particular client, just to add a few more details if we need it, if we're doing something particular for that client.
I'm trying to find a procedure that has a lot of information here. Banking rules is a good one. So, it's got, you can see that this isn't a step-by-step checklist. This is for somebody who maybe doesn't always use rules, or forgot exactly how to do something, or just wants to double check what this might look like. And so it's got screenshots, it's got more information. So this is what a procedure might look like as opposed to a task. Which is a checklist. So it's a step-by-step checklist. But this might have a little more information with it, but then it has a procedure has even more information.
We should also mention the help site. If you at the top of every page, there's the link to the help site.
Yep.
And sometimes we even have live chat available on the help site.
Yes. If there's a human being there, it'll say chat. Otherwise, you can send the questions, and again, those are answered. We try to answer all client emails within 24 business hours.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. I hope to see you at our next one, which will be the following Friday. And Sarah,
next Friday.
Remind me what the topic is next week?
We are going to actually be talking about setting up your firm's work in Aero. So we're going to be talking about Aero templates, master Aeros, using the library, defining your work, procedures even. So that's sort of the meat. That's the kind of the hard part in setting up a new workflow system, is actually trying to figure out how you do what you do and putting it down on paper. It's not the right word, but putting it down in print. So we're going to be talking about that next week.